Yes, we can start, sir.
Good evening. This is Geeta Mallikarjunan, CEO of HMA, and on behalf of Hyderabad Management Association, I welcome you to the MSME program on the topic Stressed Industrial Units, Rehabilitation and Revival Challenges in Management and Legal Aspects by Mr. Kadiraju Murali Krishna Raju, Advocate, Law Advisory, Resolution Professional, registered with IBBI, and independent director registered with IICA. I also welcome our office bearers, MC members, and all the members who have registered for this program and who are on this platform, as well as viewing us live on Facebook. I welcome our Vice President, Mr. Jevan Naidu, our Secretary, Mr. Chandrasekhar, our Convener MSME, Mr. Peddi Rajendra Krishna Prasad, and I also welcome our Speaker, Mr. Gaddi Raju Murali Krishna Raju, and request our President, Mr. V. Ramchandar, to take the session forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Geeta ji. A very good evening and a warm welcome to all of you present over today. We're listening to the talk by our senior member and life member, an experienced person from ITC, Sri Murali Krishna Raju Garu, on the topic of stressed industrial assets, rehabilitation, and revival. I think it is a talk of the day, a subject which we keep on looking at constantly. I take this opportunity to greet our valuable members of HME and office bearers, Vice President Sri Jayant Garu, Secretary Chandrasekhar Garu. I don't see other. I don't know if I miss anybody for the office bearers, but I Mr. Rajendra Prasad Peddi, the convener for today's program, and senior members and Geeta ji, Karthik, and dear friends who are assembled today for listening to get a knowledge about a very important topic, as I mentioned earlier, on the stress industrial units. It is definitely a matter of great interest if all of us put a mind and try to understand a little about it. If some of us are from the industry, I think we'll know what exactly all the topic is about. I also welcome our speaker for today, especially once again, in specific, Sri Murali Krishna Garu. He always supports HMA, and I'm very happy, sir, that you are going to share your valuable experience. I know you're an engineer, but again, chose to be an advocate, and then practicing in the NCLT, being an industrial solvency professional. Before that, again, as I always normally do, I think I should talk a few words about HMA, mainly to say HMA does some works which probably relate to management, and I would also like to invite the gentlemen sitting across who are not members of HMA to please join our forum and strengthen this organization, which is really a unique organization existing for almost 60 years, or to be more specific, 58 years, and trying to propagate only nothing but management. We form a part of IMA, and I feel, sir, that HMA has been doing good work for a period of time, and always things can be done better, and our effort is in that direction. In fact, a matter of pride is that HMA has been recognized as one of the performing LMA, as we are called, a local management association, and we have been nominated to the board of the governing council of IMA, which I think is a matter of great prestige. There are about 68 LMS in the entire country, and we stand amongst the 7 or 8 LMS that have been nominated for this activity, which I think is a real matter of pride. It could have happened just only because of the good work done by the office bearers of HMA, support of members over a period of time. I would rather say at least the last 2-3 years, where we find that the vibrancy levels have been quite high. This year too, as I've been telling several times and again, that our effort has been only focused on management. And the idea we thought was that we try to uplift and give some more inputs to the young management students, young practicing managers, so that these gentlemen will be able to use this knowledge while they execute their job. The college student, when they leave the college and come into the employment or into the business fora or become an entrepreneur themselves, they'll find that these sort of inputs will be very useful. Now, very honestly, whenever I listen to such type of lectures, I really feel absolutely focused, and I will feel that Yes, such type of lectures we never had. We never listened when we were young in our younger days. So I would only request the audience, in fact, students, I keep telling them, please do not miss any class of HMA, any lecture of HMA, because they're really very valuable. Uh, as I said, we have been doing several lecture programs. Every month we have one or two programs. We have on the industrial asset, friends, Priti always makes it a point to see that at least two programs are done. And this is one, I thought it's a wonderful program because it's a real live topic. And I thank Mr. Prasad for this, Madam President Prasad Garu, for bringing in our friend Mr. Murali Krishnaraj for today's program. And apart from this, we are also doing programs for the women, for the students in a different way. Our IRP 4, which we started 2 years ago, this is the fourth batch we are doing. And as I've been telling earlier also, earlier we had hardly about 30 to 40 students. Maybe it was the initial inception. But this year, we had almost as many registrations of 175. And I thought that this is how students are getting advantage of this. And we are being asked by several colleges in from their own independent capacity to structure or design a program and give inputs to those students, to their students, as an additional inputs apart from what they've been teaching in this college. I thought that this is a welcome augury, and I'm sure over a period of time, we should be able to do more such programs. The idea basically, as I said, is to see that we keep propagating management, talk about live topics, the current topics, and today's topic in this line would be very apt because, as I said, stressed industrial units. Now, stressed industrial units, as you know, I'm sure Mr. Raju will talk a lot about it, but I just talk a few lines about it. Incidentally, because of my affiliation for this activity, that every industry goes through difficulties in many number of times. When you establish an industry, as you know, it is not an easy thing. Entrepreneurship, establishing industry has always been a difficult task. But the country looked at these industries because they contribute, especially in the MSME sector, they contributed almost 35% of GDP. And apart from that, the huge amount of employment it created in the local areas, in sense that the local areas were tapped and the local areas tapped the people in around. The catchment area was in around the local areas. So the difficulty of not getting people employed was a certain extent solved. And large industries do employ. There has been a statistic saying that in a large industry to employ one person, you have to spend about nearly more than 100 lakhs. But when you spend about 10 lakhs in an SME or MSME sector, you employ more than 10 people across. That is, the ratio is so high that small units create a lot of employment. May not be to a very high skilled level, but today you find that this industry is also moving to a higher plane. But along with this, there are also failures. Industry is not so very rosy because the industries keep struggling. It's mostly a one-man army, especially in the MSME sector. But large sector units, of course, they have greater professionalism. But all these industries have gone through ups and downs. Today we've been seeing that uh, that we have heard a news recently, and the news item, the recent Lok Sabha, where the finance minister has mentioned that about 10.9 lakhs of 10.9 lakh crores of NPAs have been written off. And there is another statistic saying that about 13% of that particular amount only has been recovered during the last 5 years. It gives an alarming signal saying that are the industrial units going bad? Now, to reduce this, one is, of course, as Sir has rightly pointed out, how to rehabilitate them and how to revive them. So, the support to the industry, giving a little more funds. Most industries suffer on account of funds crisis, apart from other technical issues and all that. The funds usually contribute to a large extent from this point of view that they don't get adequate support on the banks. And when they don't get timely. It's one of the reasons why many of the industries suffer. And then the realization from the bills, the works that they do, they can't get easily from the government, from larger undertaking that they keep doing. So it leads to a difficulty in the cash flows and the working capital cycle gets hindered. So most of the time they erode, they enter into the working capital cycle, and finally they find that they are found difficulty of getting money. So in this process, sir, I'm sorry, please. Basically, sir, I thought that from the point of view that these units require a lot of support. One is, of course, rehabilitation. To the extent possible, if the industries can be revived, what is the package that can be given? And then finding that it may not be possible, then most of the banks started to go to the debt recovery tribunals. SFCs went to this using SFC Act. And then later on came the Surface Act. And later, I think now what Mr. Murali Raju are doing is the recovery through the NCLT. I wouldn't like to talk much of take much of the time, but I'll request our friend Raju Garu to please give us the knowledge that probably will be very useful to all of us, and I'm sure it will be a very valuable session. With these few words, I thank Mr. Prasad, Rajan Krishna Prasad Garu for bringing in Mr. Murali Krishna once again, and thanks for the opportunity. And I look forward for a great session. Over to you, Mr. Rajan Krishna Prasad Garu, to please talk a few words about our valuable guest. Namaste.
Yeah, namaste, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I think you rightly, validly added some very good points in this particular webinar, sir. Thank you. Respected President Ramchandra Garu and respected HMA Vice President Jayant Naidu Garu, respected Honorable Secretary of HMA Chandrasekhar Garu, respected CEO of HMA Geeta Ma'am, and my fellow MC members and esteemed HMA participants, HMA members, and our today evening guest lecturer, C. GMK Raj Garu. Again, we invited him a very, very important topic on related to MSME industries. That's on stressed industry unit, rehabilitation, real challenges, and management legal aspect is the topic of today. As you already, Ramchandra Garu briefly given a brief note about the industry scenario in India right now, but I'll just add one or two lines on this. An industrial unit faces stress during its lifetime, which if not addressed would lead to sickness. Chronic sickness requires rehabilitation of revival measures. When this fails, the unit has to wound up because of loss to the stakeholders. The cause of stress may including management errors, project management failures, and unexpected external changes. Management must strive to prevent sickness by tracking early warning indicators, have a good governance and risk management system, checks and balances of the shareholders, etc. When sickness is imminent, the company must quickly deal with it internally by planning and deploying a turnaround strategy. Assistance is available by way of rehabilitation provisions of bank, state financial institution. This will be used to restructure operation, capital, etc. The advantage at this stage is control to retain the company. The insolvency and bankruptcy code offers options for companies that turn sick and need revival. The control here goes to the creditors. The code provides a corporate insolvency resolution, failing which liquidation. There is a special dispassion of for MSME sector of pre-pack insolvency resolution. The code is also provides a voluntary liquidation. There are challenges dealing with the sick companies. The management requires a different set of competences and mindsets. I think in this presentation, we will hear more from GMK Rajgaru in detail with some sort of a case. Now it's my privilege to read the profile of GMK Rajgaru. GMK Rajgaru is a BTech Mechanical Engineering from IIT Madras and gone Executive Development at Carnegie Mellon University. He holds a certificate in or Master of Investment and Financial Analysis and Chartered Financial Analyst from ICFI. He has also done LLB from ASLU and Masters of Business Laws from National Law School, India University, Bangalore. Mr. GMK Rajgaru has been in industry, that is ITC Limited, for over about 32 years. During this period, he has held senior management positions, including CEO for a strategic business unit. The roles taken up included being VP, Vice President, Factory Manager, Operation Head, Engineering and Project Manager. Areas of involvement include manufacturing, Management Information System, ERP, HR, IR, marketing and sales. He has led several initiatives including ISO 9000 and ISO 14000, International Quality Rating System, IQRS, Export Customer Certification, Juran Quality Program, ERP implementation, and Employee Long-Term Agreement. He has been associated with turnaround of 2 units, 2 world-class performance. He has seen the units go sick and finally dissolved. Also witnessed 2 companies amalgamation, one a sick unit and another core sector company where capital infusion was required for avoiding the technology obsolescence. After the corporate career, he has He was a freelance consultant in the areas of business management, intellectual property, and technology transfer. As a senior advisor at IIT Madras, Center for Industrial Consultancy and Sponsor Research, he set up an intellectual property cell and envisaged the importance of intellectual property with all researchers. The support extended to commercializing intellectual property and guiding researchers who wanted to take their units research into startups. As part of legal advisory practice, he has advised over 20 startups in various business and legal aspects, including investment, advisory, appointment, employee issues, customer agreement, succession issues, IPR dispute resolution. Now, he has taken up advocacy and is advocate with the Telangana Bar. He advises on corporate law, insolvency law, and other business law. He has appeared before the National Company Law Tribunal, National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, and the High Court. He is also a resolution professional, that is, registration with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, and independent director registered with the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. He has been involved as a resolution professional, advocate, or advisor in over 10 matters related to corporate insolvency, process, and liquidation. Welcome you, Raj Garu, as it is indeed a great honor for us to be taking over this particular sub-subject on this related to MSME, sir. Now, I have a small request to all the participants, and they can put up their questions in the chat box. At the end of the session, either myself or Raj Garu can take up the question, and so Raj Garu will be addressing the answers related to that. If not, if the people wanted to interest to participate in the discussion, they can do that by unmuting their mic and introduce themselves and address. Thank you. Sir, now it's your mic is yours, sir.
Thank you, Prasad Garu. Good evening to all of you. First, I'd like to start by thanking HMA for this invitation to talk on this it's a difficult subject, stressed in industrial units, rehabilitation and revival challenges. And I'm going to touch on the management and the legal aspects. So I'm bringing it from two different sides. Ramchandra Geeta madam, thank you for the introduction. He's saying in my career, I've had the the good fortune of actually being inside stress companies and then to turn them around and going through all the processes that are required for the same. And more recently, in the last 4 years, I've changed into a new avatar, and now I'm on the outside looking at companies and having to deal with them as a resolution professional, as an advocate, to see how to turn around and how to bring them out using the statutory support of the in the IBC, Insolvent Bankruptcy Code. Okay, this topic is large and there are several dimensions. I would say a large number of dimensions. And in this talk, I will try and touch upon some of the dimensions, drawing on my own experience and also learnings that I have gained from my engagement with a lot of other professionals who are in this field. Okay, so with that, let me now launch off. In case you're having any problem with the audio, please let me know, then I'll switch off the video. Okay, till that time, I'll keep it going. Okay, the reason, instead of calling it industrial, reason is that before sickness comes stress. Okay, and it's like we say for the body, I mean, we should do stress management. So just like that, for even a company, we should look at the stress levels in the organization and see what needs to be corrected. And prevention is the best cure in any case. So, okay, so with that brief introduction, let me start off. Okay, now sickness or industrial sickness can mean different things to different people. So in order to make sure that there is some uniformity in the language that we need to understand what the definition of industrial sickness is. Okay, this keeps changing from time to time, but I'll just quickly go through it. A company where the accumulated losses in any financial equal to 50% or more of its average net worth for 4 years immediately preceding such financial year. Okay, so that means if the net worth gets eaten into to the extent of 50%, then is heading towards sickness or it's already sick. Or other definition could be a company which fails to repay its debts within 3 consecutive quarters on demand made in writing for its repayment by a creditor or creditors of such company. Okay, now this definition changes from time to time, okay, and over a period of time. But this is just to keep in mind because ultimately we must have a common language to talk. And of course, bankers use the term non-performing assets, which keeps coming up again and again. So I thought we should also be aware of that. So let's look at the extent of sickness. I think to just get a common understanding. So the Reserve Bank publishes a financial stability report at regular intervals. So they have this thing called gross NPA, which is the total of all loan assets that haven't been repaid by the borrowers within a 90-day period. So this is a very strong indicator of sickness in the industry. So I've just culled out some statistics which may be of interest to us. So if you look at the industry sector, which is about 43% or 43.7% of the sector which loans that go through it, it's about 8.4% is NPA. Similarly, for the services sector, which is 26.8%, it's about 5.8%. And if you look at the MSME sector, by aggregating the NPAs of the public sector banks and the private sector bank, it's about 9.3%. Okay, so that's 9.3% of the investment that has been made is not performing. Okay, so in the sense that it's stuck. Okay, now let us look at the impact. What does it mean in terms of overall figures? Okay, I just put down for, I don't need to repeat these figures, but as of March 2022, we had the following distribution of total number of units. In the medium sector, 0.35, that is 1%, and the micro segment, 76.27 or 95%. So 95% of the MSME is in the micro sector. Okay. So if 9.3% of the advances to MSME sector are going to NPA, means that numbers are quite huge. Okay. Now there is no figure that is currently available, but because RBI publishes data on the basis of what it comes from the banks, but there is a census which is also done. I think the last census was done way back in around 14-15. So as per that, at that time, there were 249,903 units which were sick in the MSME sector. And my feeling is that today it would be somewhere between 8 to 10 is what we need. So what is the objective of this whole talk, this whole regulatory regime? Is that how do we quickly detect whether there is a problem and address it? Now, and second is, if that cannot be addressed, then can we speedily resolve it and find some mechanism for reviving it? And if that does not happen, then we should quickly liquidate it. We should not hesitate, because the longer you leave somebody sick, the more the cost and the more deterioration that takes place in the assets, and the realizations will be very low, as you will notice later when I share some statistics that have been published by IBBI. Okay, so covered this. Okay, now a moot question could be that what is comparative figures around the world? As Ramchandra Garu was saying, see, every entrepreneurship is not a simple thing. It's a journey and it's an adventure in a way. Okay, and the sickness in industry is also a part of industry. Okay, it's not something you can wish away. But the point is that what is the difference? So when we look at global standards from the point of view of the countries like US, UK and all, they tend to have sicknesses in the region of 3 to 4%, whereas ours are in the region of 8 to 9%. So that difference needs to be looked at, and actions need to be taken, and best practices need to be incorporated. Okay, so we'll now quickly look at what are the causative factors for this. Okay, so now I have taken, I've used some models. Now, of course, the causative factors depend on the industry, depend on the individual company, depend on the states that they're operating. So there are a whole lot of items that can be listed out. But I thought I'd just take some main ones, and I've used the pestle analysis to just portray these points up front you. And okay, I won't read through each item by item, but let's take 1 or 2 examples. Say for the nano project of Tata's that was set up in West Bengal, because change in government policies, it went sick. Okay, so that's an external factor. Or you take another example, which I am acquainted with. Sometimes demand changes because society's needs start changing. So I would like to take the example of, say, Wimco Limited, which was a monopoly in the area of match manufacturing at one time and a leading manufacturer. But as people started moving more towards lighters, the business started fading off. Okay. Second is Wimco was also hit by some policies in terms of tax laws. So they brought in differential thing. So it affects. So sometimes it favors MSMEs, but some MSMEs may also get affected by this. Okay, so that are external factors. So I'll move to the next thing. The next is a lot of projects, especially in the MSME sectors, you will have come across quite a number of examples which are non-starters. Okay, so they get into problems right from the beginning. And so if you look at the various stages of a project, from initiation to closing of a project, I just culled out certain important areas that need to be looked at. And okay, and I just like to share a few examples. In fact, one example is technology selection. Many MSMEs especially run into problems because they bring in technology from abroad. Okay, and also it's not only for MSMEs, even for power projects. Many a time you bring in second-hand equipment from somewhere, and the due diligence is not enough. And then when you come in here, you find that something is wrong, and you don't even use it, or you use it and it sits idle. It does not perform to the required standards. So in fact, there's one case somebody has shared where a whole equipment came in from abroad and is still lying in ports almost 5 to 10 years after the project was conceived. So these are some of the things. So important things to look at is cost and time overruns. These are very important. In fact, I'll share one example later of how a project went sick because of that. And another important area is non-achievement of the performance standards. When we plan for a project, there are certain things, deliverables that are expected from the project. And it's very important that at the closing stage that these are matched. And if they don't match, we must insist that they are adhered to, and various guarantees are taken from suppliers to make sure that this happens, because this is a very important area of sickness. Then, of course, there are a whole lot of internal issues, management errors that come up. Okay, of course, there is one school of thought which say that everything is a management error ultimately, whether it's external fact, because these are all supposed to be planned for. But okay, let's keep that aside. So management errors can be at a board level. That's a very important one. And of course, at the other end is the whole organization itself not pulling along and not being in alignment. So board ones are things like fiduciary failures of control systems, failures of fiduciary duties of the directors. Satyam being a good example where that happened, and the whole company went into a problems and it had to be turned around. Or another example that I have is that of Union Carbide, where again a fiduciary duty when it went bankrupt. And we all know what happened there. Then I have some more examples here of, okay, I will not reading through one, say Dunlop India. It was located in the state of West Bengal. And because of persistent labor problems, okay, the company started going sick and it didn't get corrected in time. And then it had to be shut at some point in time. I have an example from the NCLT of a company called Super Seeds. It had an entrepreneur who was a research thing and an expert in the field. And he was doing very well. And then he wanted to expand very fast. Okay, so he went to a private equity company and brought in funds. But the private equity company set very stiff targets in terms of growth. And in chasing those growth targets, the poor guy, when there was a seasonal failure and some other issues that came up, he could not deliver on that. And in this pursuit and chasing that, he went sick. Okay, so those are, and then of course, technology upgradation is very important. Changing the organization's offerings in line with the new consumer demands are very important. And here we have a whole lot of our PSUs, which actually were monopolies at one time, doing very well, and were in a very good dominant position, but did not upgrade themselves. And we know where they are today. I mean, to just name a few, HMT, IDP, and others. Okay, so companies may have failed. Of course, a lot of other spin-off benefits may have come, which this is not the session for that. I will move on. Okay, now the question may be, what is the relative importance of all these factors? Okay, I couldn't get too much of data on this, but somewhere I found out that when they had polled promoters, so they had given some weightage like this. They said 46% was because of working capital and delay in sanction of working capital, or there was a time gap between the sanction of the term loans and the working capital, so 46%. Another 36 or 66% have attributed it to demand and marketing problems, 13% to erratic power supply, and 11% to poor and obsolete technology or equipment problems. Okay, the source I've put down at the bottom if you want to go into details of that. But having said that, see, as a person who's seen it from two sides, I personal feeling that well, they may be contributors, but I think a little bit of externalization is taking place, because all of us tend to always put the blame on the outside factors. Okay, to some extent, we also need to look at what has been happening inside. And I think sometimes the protection and the concessions that have been given also may have been, to some extent, a problem of not allowing Indian MSME sectors to become competitive in a global context. Some of that is changing now, and these are the new challenges that MSMEs have to face. And of course, the government is supportive, and a lot of the ecosystem is also evolving and developing. So we need to leverage all these things. Okay, and I would like to end with one last factor. So many a time when sickness starts, okay, these stakeholders start pulling in different directions. And I put down what various people try to do. And it's very important that alignment at that stage is very important. See, when there is trouble, people must not start running. Okay, people must all rally together. So, many a time when that does not happen, the sickness quickly drifts into and becomes a bigger problem, because the stakeholders do not align themselves. So let's take an example. There's a unit which is sick. Okay, the labor starts quickly getting worried. And instead of working together, they start, say, you get into a strike situation. It gets customers to run away. It gets suppliers to start blocking off supply. So it actually becomes a precipitous decline rather than a gradual decline, which can be corrected. Okay. So with that, I would like to conclude one part of it, which is try to understand what is the extent of sickness, what are the factors and everything. So now let us move into what we should do. Okay. And so in looking at that, I just, from various literature and my own experience, I put down what are the various stages that a company goes through. So you have a normal unit on the left-hand side, then something start going wrong. Okay. So then some decline in profits start taking place, and there's a tendency towards sickness. Then the next stage, when cash losses start occurring, or you start finding the net worth of the organization slipping very quickly. And that's when you come to the stage of incipient sickness. And then, of course, when cash losses keep on happening and are likely to happen in the future years, current ratios, that means your liabilities start surpassing the assets, then you're really into sickness. And when your net worth becomes negative, okay, and everyone starts throwing up their hands, then you are into chronic sickness. Now let us look at how we need to address it. So here I will be sharing my experience and the learnings from my two chapters in my career. So let's first look at preventing sickness. Okay, now this is very important. So a lot of people wait for sickness to happen. Why can't we prevent it? By taking certain good measures. And I'd like to just focus on that first, because ultimately prevention is better than sickness. The first is the focus on good governance. Okay, I think a lot of MSMEs need to take a cues from large organizations and learn something from them and adopt it. And also look at best practices around the world. Okay, so there's an external governance, because the government also sets up a framework to make sure that companies don't slip into sickness by insisting on certain practices, which is there in the statutes. Then the internal governance aspect, what the board and the internal organization sets up for itself. And then you have an external auditor to watch you and give you that. So ultimately, we're looking at adequate checks and balances, making sure that one person does not hijack the organization. Okay, so that everybody works together for the benefit of the organization, that company. So here again, let's take the example of Satyam. So when Satyam happened, there was a earthquake in the industry, okay, the whole IT industry. The government was very concerned about the reputation. So in fact, the whole Companies Act 2013, which replaced the Companies Act 1956, was speedily piloted through to bring in some degree of confidence back. And of course, clause 49 of the listing agreement was also brought in order to make sure there was greater transparency and accountability brought in. So these are some of the changes. So corporate governance is a very important thing. Okay, in what form, in what character that you must adopt it would of course depend upon the size of the company and what you need to do. Okay, the next one is of course monitoring early warning signals. I would say that every company, whether it's a small company, big company, or a very large thing, everybody has to have a dashboard of early warning signals or critical parameters that may want. Okay, you can have a huge Adobe list. If you have a large list, the problem is that you will get distracted with too much of information and lose the woods for the trees. The trees for the woods. So that you have to be careful about. And the same thing, if you don't look at anything or look at only one or two, you may miss out these signals. So what is appropriate for the industry, you must always select and put down there. So I've given some indicators there, which I've taken. The blue ones are indicators for sickness, and the red ones are when you become chronically sick. Okay, right. I've taken some parameters that various companies choose to think. What fits in for you obviously will have to be done by you for your company. Okay, this aspect cannot be overlooked. This is the aspect of risk management. Okay, all today we know after what happened in Union Carbide, and of course certain other companies also. Today, risk management policy has become a mandated requirement for all large companies. So an Infosys, an ITC, or any large company that you have will have a risk management policy. And they also have made mandatory for the board to review risk management. Okay, so what is this to look at? If you look at the process, what is it? We need to identify risks. So here I put down certain lists. Okay, risk obviously will have to be tailor-made for each organization. They could be different for each company. So you cannot make a general list, but there are certain common ones that need to look at. So we look at to identify the risks for your company. You have to assess those risks. Okay, then you have to put in place mechanisms for controlling the risk. Okay, one is you can try and eliminate the risk by designing your systems, or you can set up review mechanisms to make sure that they are controlled and do not go out of control. And of course, and if you cannot do any one of them, then go and insure yourself, so that at least if all things go wrong, at least insurance is there to protect you. And please review your controls, because ultimately every risk has to be evaluated on the probability of its occurrence and the impact that it's likely to have. Some things can be very, say if you're on a Union Carbide's example, the probability of a failure taking place was very low, but the impact is so high that it completely overturned the organization, not only at the local level, but even at the headquarter level way back in USA. Okay, so with that, let me move on to the next one. The other one, as I had mentioned, see, we have to be careful in every organization, whether small or big. See, you cannot let one person, run the whole organization without adequate checks and balances, and without other people also playing an active role. Okay, so that's why the Companies Act, in order to prevent, one person hijacking the company or a group of shareholders just hijacking the company and working against the interests of the company, has provided for this. So shareholders have to be alert to the company's interest, and when they feel there is a need, they must bring up, take a dispute, either as a mismanagement dispute or as a class action suit. Now, let's take an example. So here we have an example of a recent one of Tata Sons versus Misri. Okay, I will not get into the merits of who was right or who was wrong or what were the relative merits of the two parties. But it was a typical case where the issues of what is happening in the company and how the company's interest has to be kept in came up into a lot of focus of the judiciary and also for the industry in general. Okay, and another thing is, of course, succession planning. I won't get into great details. Each of them is a topic of a 1 hour discussion. But I wanted to share a simple example of a company called Gade Automation Solution, which I had to advise. Now, this was a company in the robotics space run by family members. So what happened was the father and the son who were running the company succumbed during the COVID crisis. Okay, and then what happened with the company went adrift, didn't know what to do, because the other director was the wife who hardly knew anything about what was happening in the company. So, succession plan is important to avoid vacuum. And the other, of course, problem is that if you do not have these things a little chalked out properly, power struggles start off. And when power struggles start off, unnecessary disputes come up, and then the company gets distracted from its main purpose. So that's why today in all large companies, formal requirements are there to have a succession policy and a framework for working on this. Okay, then another one is, of course, cash is ultimately lifeblood of any MSME or any large company, any company for that matter. So MSMED Act has provided for it. So it's important that companies look at this area in order to avoid sickness because of cash getting strapped. In fact, I'll share one example of a startup actually in the educational space, which was doing very well, called Lido. It'll come a little later in the presentation, where they got cash. I mean, everything was there. Profits were there. Top line was there. Bottom line was supposed to be also there. But cash, they got starved out because they couldn't get the money in. And then they had to file a CIRP application under Section 10 to be bailed out. Okay. And of course, this again is a much cliched thing. Total quality and continuous improvement is important. And MSMEs need to focus on this and have good programs to look at each one of these factors, because suddenly, say after 5 years of running, you go sick. After 10 years of running, you go sick. So I just want to share two small examples. One is of a machine tool company which uses CNCs for basically machining engine blocks. You get forged blocks and then you machine them. So this person, the thing was run by a person who's came in out of an automotive company after long years of experience and an expert in the field. So he knew both the technology and the market, but still managed his company very tightly and carefully, investing at the right time, taking the right decisions, and he has been flourishing for many years. Okay, and his son is also going to come in after being qualified and after having gone to certain institutions abroad to take over the company. Another example is of another machine tool company where an IIT professor started a company and run it for 20 years. And then now his next generation has been trained to take over. So what I meant is basically to say that a lot of factors go in to ensuring lack of sickness. And these preventive measures are very important. Okay. So now I think I'll go to the next stage. I may have to rush a little faster. So the next stage is when you're into sickness or incipient sickness, okay, turnarounds have to be done. Okay, turnaround. Now here I'm going to harp on that aspect of turnaround, which has to be done by the board itself, by the promoters, by the existing management, without the control going off into the hands of creditors or external people. Okay, so we are talking about a tendency towards sickness or incipient sickness. Okay, a lot of consultants are there to help in this area, and they talk about a five-step model. Some people talk about a 7-step model. Okay, I've listed out all the factors there. Okay, I'll quickly touch upon each one of them. And I'm sure there are a lot of HMA participants, a lot of them are from the industry. So I don't need to educate them. They'll probably quickly recognize what I'm trying to say. So I'll try and just quickly take you through this part of it. Okay, the first one, of course, leadership change. In MSME, you may say, how will I change the leadership? Then, of course, there has to be a change of mindset, or you need to bring in someone to advise you. Okay, so this becomes a very important. Take the example of Satyam. When it went into a problem, the whole board had to be changed because first the wrongdoers have to be removed out. Okay, the second is you don't want the existing people and the status quo to block the change that may be necessary. You may want fresh ideas and all that. Okay, so that's there. Second aspect is that you need to assess what is wrong. Okay, we'll run around to customers, run around things, chase, increase the thing, everything you may want to do. But unless you get to the root causes, the correction cannot take place. And for that, a lot of data is necessary. So here I just wanted to share from my own personal example, because this information is difficult to get because these are all internal information. So here, division, which was, working very hard, but we were always either negative or just barely above negative. And at some time it looked like if we did nothing, then we would go spin out completely into the negative, and then we had to be hived off, because large companies are also impatient. Nobody waits for you to keep making mistakes. So, like for example, we had to say, so we had to understand whether the business is viable, can it be turned around? Okay, what are the factors? So we looked at two. I just want to share two examples. Like for example, margins. We had almost 200 plus products. Okay, we had to look at the margins that were being got, and we had to get into the details of that, and also look at the fixed costs. What are the elements of fixed costs, and what do we need to do? And I remember we did a sorting to see what is that should be done, what could be avoided, what should be done, and categorize. And then we found ultimately that when we shed some of them, without doing more work, we were able to at least start putting our heads up above the water. Okay. And then, of course, we had to start looking at the fixed costs and start correcting a lot of them so that the break-even levels could be brought down. Okay. And I'll share some of the things that we needed to do. Okay. Third one is, of course, stabilization. Stabilization, what we mean, we need cash. Okay. Now, what happens when things go wrong? We had discussed earlier, when stakeholders will start pulling in different directions. So you get into a big problem of how to manage them. So if you see the regulatory framework, it provides for moratorium, compulsory moratorium, so that there's a calm period during which people have time to look at the problems and try and sort it out. Okay, so the cash becomes one way of taking this thing. And of course, you need to have some quick wins. So give you an example, there's Hindustan Organic Chemicals, which had 14 units. So they had to dispose of 9 units to at least get cash in and avoid the bleeding. So similarly, some of the other examples I will show you later, it all comes to this. Okay, how to improve the performance, what restructuring activities that you may look to. And here I will share some ITC example. Of course, a little later, I will also share some examples from the, and also Bhadrachalam Paperboards Limited thing. So you need to do a lot of process improvements, looking at quality, waste reduction, organizational changes. So a lot of quality improvement programs we had to embark on, ITC packaging. Okay, organizational change, we had to look at employee involvement programs. We had to look at deadwood and see what we need to do in terms of voluntary thing. Then we had to relook at all our incentive schemes to make sure that they're focused on the main things that we needed at that point in time. And then, of course, increase sales and financial restructuring and all that had to be done. And that has to be, every MSME has to look at it. And then, of course, organizational restructuring may sometimes be necessary. And here I would like to speak a little bit about ITC Bhadrachalam. So I'm just taking the liberty of talking about, now I'm not in the company, but as many of you may know, ITC Bhadrachalam actually was Bhadrachalam Paperboards Limited. It was outside. The company as a separate company. Okay, and when liberalization took place, see, a lot of international board companies wanted to come into India. Okay, imports were also liberalized. So a lot of duties were
Volume breaking, sir.
Sir, maybe you switch on
the
your
whole
video, sir.
organization. Sorry, Andy?
Switch off your video, sir.
Switch off the video, Andy?
Yes, that will be better, sir. Yes.
I just switched the video off. Okay. Thank you, Andy. Am I moving a little fast or is it okay? Okay. So in the so
Sir, voice still breaking, I think.
Even for packaging business, which is actually small scale industry size. Second is you cannot rest on your oars, because tomorrow again some new challenges may come in. So this process has to be continuous, and you need to put in good planning system and control systems is what it means. Okay, so with that, we now step into the whole area of rehabilitation revival. Okay, now here we are now into sickness and chronic sickness. So it is the issue, or it may be beyond reach. And sometimes you need governmental help, or you will need the help of other stakeholders in the thing. So I'll take some. Which are meant to basically support. So the guidelines for the thing starting back in 1981, guidelines for the government to make sure that the industries are supported, and going all the way down to say CDR and various other things, they are now being subsumed. So the RBI now has only a prudential framework for resolution of stressed assets. So that's one side of it. The other side was the IRDA Act, Rehabilitation Bank was brought in. Okay, then the SICA Act came in, under which the BIFR, the Board for Industrial and Reconstruction, was brought up. Okay, which of course had now been put aside with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code coming in from 2016. Of course, there are certain other acts which are still there. There's the RDBI Act, under which the DRT, or Debt Recovery Tribunals, were set up. These were basically to help banks recover, and they have a bearing on sickness. And all companies to take note of. The other one is the SARFAESI Act, which said that secured assets were brought out of the purview of courts, and said that they can be exercised. Okay, and of course, asset reconstruction companies and all brought in. Okay, SICA was actually supposed to go away in 2002, and because the rehabilitation thing was supposed, but then because of a lot of resistance and opposition, it stayed on and was finally only removed in 2016 when it was repealed finally. Okay, so this will give you, I will not get into the details of each and everything. I will focus more on the IBC, which is the prevalent mechanism that's available. And okay, the ecosystem basically has on one side the regulators. So you have the government, state, and the institutions under them. Then the RBI, the IBBI, this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. The ROCs and RDs have a role to play, and the NCLTs and NCLATs, and of course, Supreme Court sitting at the. So a SICA has to be taken into a healthy enterprise. So who are the agencies that are there? Are the institutions that are working, who are actually actively going to work? There are banks and term lending institutions through whom we have to interact. There are information utilities. This is a new thing that has come up, because now what is being attempted is that all information on bank credits and defaults and everything are being brought into a repository, so that they're readily available, so that when these go to adjudication, information would be easily and fast available. The next one is resolution applicants. These are other companies who may pitch in to take over the company. Then asset reconstruction companies and AIFs, that's alternative investment funds. Then the whole cadre of what we call insolvency professionals, of which I am one of them. Okay, there are also in insolvency professional entities. That means sometimes an individual may not be able to do it alone, so an entity may need to come in. So in fact, all the big four like Ernst & Young, PW, so many of them also now have wings, entities, and there are other players. And then the whole aspect of registered valuers, because when you get into this thing, valuation becomes a big debatable issue. So there are registered valuers and registered valuers organized. So this is the ecosystem, okay, which is working on the thing. Okay, so I will now just like to step aside for a short while before I get deeply into IBC to look at some of the other initiatives of the government, okay, which have been on for a long time. Of course, the BIFR was there, which has been replaced by IBC. But an important requirement is what is a viable SIC enterprise, okay? So I took this from I copied it from the Gujarat government circular, because it very well explains what do you mean by a viable SIC enterprise. The important point is that you must first be registered as a company, should have been in operation for some time, and then you must be technically feasible and economically viable and determined by certain institutions that are there already in the system. So, and subject to that, certain initiatives are available. There could be financial assistance from the commercial banks, via, of course, under the guidance of the RBI, organizational measures both at the central and the state levels, and fiscal concessions which are built into the fiscal provisions. I'll just quickly touch on these. So commercial banks, okay, NPA guidelines or OTS schemes come in from time to time. Say, for example, during the COVID, NPA guidelines were put on hold for some time. Okay, so like that. So what do these mean? It could be rescheduling of loans and interest grant of additional working capital, waiving of interest on loans, or a moratorium on a payment of interest. Second is organizational measures. I think Mr. Ramchandra Gadu is from SFC, so he know more about on this subject. But okay, I just for knowledge sake, so state level interinstitutional committees could be there. So these are all state specific institutions, which are trying to coordinate between RBI, banks, the state level institutions to make sure that the appropriate assistance is provided. Or there could be special cells, or even the MSME facilitation under the MSMED Act, okay, to provide arbitration facilities for receivable problems and etc. Then, okay, there's an institution called TIHC, Telangana Industrial Health Clinic, is an initiative of the Telangana government to basically support viable sick units. But some of these things, but when you look at, these are all small initiatives in comparison to the problem that is we're facing, okay, which MSME is also faced. So, but there are agencies which are there to help. Okay, then I also looked at the Telangana Industrial Department's website. If you see, it says that Telangana Labor Department is supposed to step in to help bring labor and managements together to work through these trying times when you're sick. Then, of course, there are fiscal connections. Income tax has some provisions like saying that if a sick unit is merged with a healthy unit, some tax benefits flow to the healthy unit. Then, of course, the government also announces schemes from time to time, like excise loans to sick and weak units. Okay, of course, excise is not there now, GST. But the government, central government now is moving towards trying to avoid some of these things to a large extent and leaving it to the competitiveness of units too. Then reliefs and concessions. Again, on the website of, say, Telangana government talks about interest rebate to banks which come in to help sick and units, deferment of tax arrears, okay, relief in terms of energy charges, then even saying mortgaging of surplus lands which may not be permitted under the ULC Act, allowing certain some concessions, some reliefs. So these are some of the things. Okay, the details are all there. I think this site also I put down there. You can look at them. But a very important caveat here I must mention, because see, a lot of since I'm now in the NCLT and I keep hearing, a lot of the sickness also comes up because of the acts and misdeeds, omissions and commissions of promoters. Okay, so here I must share a caveat which says that units becoming sick on account of willful mismanagement, default, or unauthorized diversion of funds, or disputes among partners will not be classified as sick units which are eligible to pay. So this, of course, must be borne in mind. Okay, so with that, let me now come to the IBC. Okay, here I've just summarized in one page the various provisions under the IBC. Okay, I'm not going to go one by one into each one of them. So I've colored it to help you. So on the left, the green provisions are basically explains the act and the various terms that are used. Okay, so that's one part of it. The blue ones relate to corporates. Okay, how corporates of any type, when you're talking about small scale industry, any corporate, okay, of any size, it applies. So there are provisions relating to corporate insolvency resolution process. That is where you try and turn around the company. Okay, so the mechanisms for that. Then there's a way for fast tracking some of these processes. Okay, now then there's a process for voluntary liquidation. Sometimes the company may realize it's not worthwhile pushing along. Okay, it's better to voluntarily liquidate. So that provision is there. If all of them don't work, then liquidation of the company and winding up. So all that provisions are provided there. And then for MSME sectors, there's a pre-pack thing. Basically, there's a special dispensation from thing. So these are all notified right now, and they're all applicable. So I'll share some examples a little later to shed some more light on this. And then there is the brown provisions, which are basically meant for individuals and partnership firms. These have not yet been notified. And okay, maybe because this is a very large number of units that are there, and maybe there is hesitancy and the people are taking time to. Of course, right-hand side is all the institutions and ecosystem, which I've already covered earlier in my presentation. Okay, the IBC is an important landmark legislation. It is actually impacting a lot of other acts which I've put down there all around. And it's in fact prevailing on certain provisions that were there in the other acts. Even for the Income Tax Act, there's a priority that has been now given to creditors' dues over income tax dues. Okay, so there's a waterfall mechanism. which is thing which I'll also mention a little later. Okay, so I just put down certain options. See, what are the different forms in which entities are there? So today there are corporate entities, which could be listed or unlisted. So what are the options? You could go for voluntary liquidation. Now, how voluntary liquidation is done, I will explain a little later. The second is you may choose to go through the corporate insolvency resolution process. You may choose, or your creditors may force you into going there. Okay, so then what happens? Okay, I'll briefly cover that. And of course, if these two don't work, then what happens when you have to get liquidated? And today the pressure is that instead of keeping companies hanging, and that was one of the reasons why BIFR has been done away with and IBC has come, because BIFR, under the BIFR system, it was almost taking 5 to 8 years for resolutions to take place. Okay, and the realizations were very low at the end of the day. And there was a feeling in government and banking circles that entrepreneurs and promoters were actually gaming the system. So they were using it basically to buy time, okay, and actually sometimes indulge in wrong practices as per them. Okay, so that's their view. So that is why. So it's so liquidation. So we come into liquidation. So the next one is if you are a corporate MSME, okay, the process is almost the same. The only thing that has been brought in is the pre-pack IRP in the option number 2, okay, which basically gives some latitude to the promoters of the existing MRP to themselves come in as candidates to take over the company and take it to the next stage. Okay, so of course, subject to certain conditionalities. Then, of course, for partnerships and sole proprietorships, the provisions are there, but that's not been notified. So the old order continues. Okay, and then of course PSU is also the same thing applies, except that government approvals may be necessary before they come in. There's another aspect of group insolvency and cross-border insolvency, okay, which is still not brought in because that makes the code very complex. So these are all in the pipeline and to be brought in. Okay, I've already touched this, just because large part of the MSME are basically partnerships or sole proprietorship. So they may be knowing more of this than I would do, but this for the complete bringing some completeness to the whole thing. So if it's a partnership, of course, the Partnership Act provisions still continue, and unless the IBC is notified, then it will shift there. So civil courts still have jurisdiction. There's sole proprietorships. Then of course, still, of course, there are a lot of steps that you got to throw through, unless you want to do a slump sale. But if you don't do that, then of course the other steps have to take place, and still the civil courts is your place. The only exception the government has made is for personal guarantors to corporates, and personal guarantors, people take loans on the basis of personal guarantees given on their asset. So the IBC is applicable to that. So that's cause of a lot of heartburn for entrepreneurs, because it brings in a lot of risk to their personal lifestyle. So I had shared one example of a company, I don't want to name it, but because of this, it has affected him personally. So that's why I'm saying the subject is very important and people need to be alert to them. Okay, so quickly I'll now move through the various aspects. So Section 59 is an application for voluntary liquidation. So people may say, why should I voluntarily liquidate? A lot of people hesitate because they feel their idea is very good. They've started a company and it should go on for eternity and it must be inherited by his children. But sometimes this does not happen. The story is not like that. Okay, so company should be treated separately from family and other thing. Company should be treated as a company. Okay, it is no different from any other asset. So at some time you may need to look at even voluntary liquidation, and it should be done early in the day. Okay, the process is that, okay, quickly, why people do, 70% of them do it because they started a company, but then they found that they don't want to carry on the business. Okay, so they go in for voluntary liquidation. Okay, another lot is that 15% find that they early in the day, they find that the business is not viable. Okay, they thought it was viable, but they've come up to a stage and they quickly find that it's better to exit. So then you go in for voluntary liquidation. The third, of course, is some promoters who find that they are unable to run their affairs. Maybe something goes wrong with some other promoters and they decide to vacate. So what is the process? I quickly run through it. So important requirement, basic requirement, there should have been no default. Okay, otherwise you cannot have voluntary liquidation. Second is majority of the directors must give a declaration that there has been no fraud and the assets are adequate to pay all the liabilities. Okay, and then a special resolution should be taking place in the company, and the approval must be sought from the creditors, a majority of the creditors. If that is done, then you intimate the statutory creditors, you appoint a liquidator who will then realize all the assets, pay off all the liabilities, okay, and make sure the balance sheet is made 0-0 on both the sides, and then apply to the NCLT for dissolution. Okay, it's not a very difficult step if all the things are right, and if you do it early. In fact, I had to do two voluntary liquidation for NMDC of two of their SPVs, one in the power sector and the other one in the steel sector. Okay, so it can be done. Of course, there are more complex ones, but it can be done, and I would ideally suggest that it's better to do it. Okay, the next one is is what happens when you are into sickness, okay, and you start defaulting. Okay, so then a CRP process gets activated. Now, okay, I'll leave the PRP process because PRP is only for MSMEs, but I'll take you through it. So this process can be activated either by the company debtor himself. Okay, then he knows that there is a default going to take place, and he quickly goes to the NCLT. So advantage of that is you can quickly get a moratorium. Okay, and if you get a moratorium, then everything stops where it is, and it gives you time to attend to the problems. If you don't do that, then financial creditors or your goods and suppliers creditors, who are called operational creditors, can initiate a CIRP process. Okay, so what happens if you're an MSME? Then you get a 120-day window in which you are still allowed to keep control of the company, but you have to appoint a resolution professional and then come up with a viable resolution plan as a best case, or what we call a base case plan. Then it is subject to a Swiss challenge process to see if any other person comes up with a better one. If they don't come, then the promoter is given an opportunity to, and that is the creditor is accepted, then that's taken forward. But if you are not an MSME, then you don't have this option. Okay, the promoters are almost pushed out, literally, and the process now, the COC, the creditors come into control. Okay, the board is suspended. Okay, resolution professional is put in charge. Okay, and then the whole process starts off, and there are very stringent Section 29A requirements to make sure that the promoters don't come back through the back door. Okay, and if this process fails, then you go to liquidation. Okay, so I've given some examples of companies. Okay, but for paucity of time, I will move on.
Sir, volume. Raju garu.
Okay, so let's quickly look at the yeah. You were asking a question. I'm pausing.
No, it's okay, sir. I think my voice rather than.
Okay, shall I? Can you hear me now?
Fine, sir. Fine, sir. Fine.
Okay.
Fine.
So you need to get a resolution and creditor approval. And once you get all those things are done, then an application can be made to the NCLT for approval. And once that takes place, then you appoint a resolution professional who will then constitute a committee of creditors and then give a chance to the corporate debtor and the existing current promoters to submit a base resolution plan. And that is, of course, subjected to a Swiss challenge and subject to the COC approval. If that gets through and gets approved, then that is adopted. Okay, and then the adjudicating authority, which is NCLT, approves that, then it's blessed and you move forward. If suppose it doesn't get blessed or it doesn't get approved, then you need to move into the CRP1 process, which is the next process that I would talk about. Okay, now the threshold here is that it should be between 1 lakh to 1 crore. Okay, that is a default of between these values only. You can go for the this process. If it is more than that, it will not be permitted. So basically, you can see it's totally targeted at the MSME sector and the promoters to give them some relief. Okay, the next one is, of course, the main part, which is the CIRP process, where the threshold has been earlier used to be 1 lakh default, but now has been increased to 1 crore from some time. Of course, if your threshold is not met, it's a creditor, then he has to go to the civil court. And if it is a company, it has to go take recourse under the Companies Act. But if the default is above 1 crore, then either the company or the creditors can seek to apply. Of course, I will not get into the details of the provision. So what happens is, once the application, if the NCLT is convinced and admits the application, then it appoints an IRP, that is an insolvency resolution professional, and declares moratorium. Okay, then the IRP then has to make a public announcement to make sure that all the claims that are there on the company are consolidated. So there's a whole process for that. So once the claims are consolidated, of course there can be disputes and everything, but that's a different process. I will not get into that detail. So he has to then constitute a committee of creditors. So it could be operational creditors, financial creditors, but it is the financial creditors who start running, who are the controlling people. Operational creditors only are there to just monitor and think, but they don't have a vote in the process. And then the committee of creditors appoints a resolution professional, and he then takes the process forward. The process, briefly in 3 steps, is he comes up with he has to compile an information memorandum, which is a very detailed document on the whole company and the status of the company, where it is coming from, and everything. Okay, it has to be as much in detail as what you would create an information memorandum for when you go in for an IPO, if not more. Okay, then he floats an expression of interest. Basically, you're inviting interested parties who may be interested in taking over the company or filing a resolution plan. And from the EOI, of course, he will get a lot of prospective candidates. Then he has applied Section 29A in order to make sure that these resolution applicants are qualified to file resolution plans. And then the meeting takes place, and after the test for resolution plan. Okay, so that these successful resolution applicants, these shortlisted resolution applicants will give resolution plans, which are then evaluated by the RP, taking the help of the COC, and then the shortlisted ones are put to vote. Okay, and the vote has to be more than 66% in favor. If that is voted in favor, then the resolution plan is put up to the adjudicating authority. Being blessed by them, but I'm not doing this monitor put by the thing, then you need to go for liquidation. But the important thing, okay, the time period that has been specified is 330 days maximum. Of course, average sometimes goes beyond that, but okay, but that's an important. Creditors in charge. An important point is the resolution plan is approved by the AA. It becomes binding and local authority. So this is a big thing because it brings in a lot of certainty for resolution. Because you must understand, a person who's coming outside to take over the company does not know what has happened in the past. Okay, and he needs a lot of assurances. So this process, to some extent, mitigates the uncertainty. So extinguishment of claims takes place, and through the resolution plan and through the adjudicating authority, certain other approvals and waivers can also be sought through specific orders from the NCLT. Okay. Okay. I've already covered the specific relaxation that has been for MSME for defaults between 1 lakh and 1 crore. So I'll not repeat this. Okay. Earlier, mergers and acquisitions were not a part of the resolution plan, but now they've been brought in. So even a merger and amalgamation can be done along with the resolution plan, so that actually when it was being handled under the code, it had to be first merged with a company which was a subsidiary of Tata Steel, and then later the resolution plan had to be approved, and then the company had to be go through the resolution plan, and then a merger could be done as a subsequent step. Similarly, GMR Power, okay, So with that, I'll come to the last step in thing, which is liquidation. This is for you understanding what happens when if no resolution plan is available for the company. Okay, what happens? Then you need to appoint a liquidator. Then a liquidation of estate is formed. A liquidation estate basically means a legal term to say all the assets and the liabilities and everything is brought together. Okay, and taken stock of. Then all claims are invited to know finally what are the claims, and then the liquidator also has to make sure that there are no frauds or other wrong transactions have taken place in the past. So all that has to take in stock, and then he starts the disposal of the assets and starts paying off the liabilities, and the distribution has to take place under a waterfall priority mechanism, which I just show you a little later. And once the balance sheet has been made 0-0 on both the sides, then of course the resolution of the corporate debt takes place, and then writing off, striking off will take place as the next step. Okay, I'll quickly run through a few examples of cases just for you to understand. So let's say Bhushan Steel, it had 57,505 crores of admitted claims. Reasons for the stress were non-allocation of captive mines and deallocation of mines, delays in the commissioning of projects, accident at a plant, and because of which the plant was shut down. Okay, it took about 270 days for the resolution plan to be approved. The final amount paid was 35,132 crores from Bamnipal Steel Authority, which is basically a subsidiary of Tata Steel Limited. And the realization fee was 63.50%. That means out of the haircut in this case. 29,000 crores default was there. Okay, it involved about 18,000 employees. Okay, finally, a consortium bid was made of 4,500. The consortium members I've given the names there. But then there was a problem here because the resolution applicant wanted to delist the company. Okay, delist basically means it's sometimes detrimental to the minority shareholders. So SEBI was also included into this case. But NCLT approved it, putting a moratorium of 5 years on delisting. But then the resolution applicants went on appeal to NCLT, which approved the delisting of the shares. Okay, so that's the sum total. But the realization, if you can see, is only 17.11%. Okay, so it was so low because this was a company which had been under BIF for a long time. So you can see how much the assets deterioration has taken place. Okay, so I just want to now share a small snapshot from IBBI's annual report of 2021. Okay, this will give you some idea of the figures. So between the period 2016, since the IBC has started off till the report date, total number of admitted cases are 4,376, of which those which came up from the SIC companies themselves were 276. Okay, and from operational creditors, that is basically goods and suppliers, people who had problems of default, 2,225 cases, and for financial creditors, which is banks, was 1,875 cases. So 617 either got settled or got stuck in appeals. 411 were withdrawn during the process of CIRP. That means there would have some settlement would have taken place between the CD and the creditors. And only 348 resolution plans were approved during this period, and about 1,277 went in for liquidation. So when asked why such a lot of liquidation, the reason that has been given is that a lot of these were basically legacy matters that came in from BIFR days, which had got stuck and now are being resolved through the IBC framework. Okay, now let's look at resolution plans. So on average, 39.26% realization was there of the claims. But if you look at the liquidation, to that, about 179% per 9. So if you had gone for liquidation, the value would have been, say, 100. But by going through this process, 1.79% of 1.79 times of that has been recovered. So to that extent, we are saying that this process has been effective to a large measure. Because the liquidations, the realizations were only 3.45% of the claims. Though, as a percentage of liquidation value, 83.22% has been there. Okay, so this show you that, so the thing that is being said is the IBC is made effective. Okay, and if you speedily resolve cases, the realizations will be much higher, which may be good even for the promoters, okay, and even for the industry. So two examples I take from the local NCLT. One is Alekha Drugs Private Limited. Okay, now this is all from public information, so I'm not revealing any confidential information. It was an application by an OC called Trident Camphor Limited because there was a default in payment, and the creditor was Punjab National Bank and two individuals. It took about 270 days, excluding COVID, to resolve. Initially, there were 5 resolution applicants that came up when the expression of interest was done. 4 of these were evaluated and voted on, 2 were voted upon. Okay, but finally, the promoter and a director with 37 years of experience was given preference. It was, I think, in the small scale sector only. Medium scale sector. So here there were 3,351 crores claims, but 197 were provided from the resolution plan, which is basically with 54.96%. I think was a haircut, but this is to go ahead, okay, and with the promoters only for the thing. Another example is the Hindu Projects Limited. This was basically an application by a financial creditor, Bank of India. There were 12 creditors. This took about 330 days, and almost with an extension of another 54 days. There were 7 in the first round. 7 applicants, resolution applicants, came forward, and their resolution plans, when they were voted, did not get a desired threshold. That means the required amount of votes in favor did not come through. So the decision was almost taken to go ahead with liquidation. But then in the last moment, CSE went back to the NCLT and requested them to come out thing, and the performance security was given. Sorry, something is coming up in terms of share results and blocking my view. 4,138 crores, against which only 500 crores was seen. So it was a huge haircut had to be taken. I think the poll thing has come in, blocking my view. I think we are running out of time. I'll just quickly run through. There are just a few more slides.
Sir, we have about, I think you're running out of time. I think you can take about 3-4 minutes, sir. 2-3
Yeah,
minutes.
I can finish in 3 minutes. That's all that I need.
Fine. Yeah.
Okay. Only thing is I'm not able to change the sheets. Okay, fine. Okay. So that's it, about it. We'll finish with this. So prior to your decision, I think basically moving back. Okay, before I conclude, I just want to take 4 slides. It'll take just 2 minutes, because ultimately all turnarounds and whatever you do, ultimately it depends on the human element, the leadership and the people who are there. So I thought it would be very important that I must end by highlighting this fact, because this is from my own experience, the leadership support, the thing. So these are the 5 things. A lot of communication that has to be done. There must be a lot of adaptability, because when you're dealing with sick industries, nothing is predictable. Tomorrow can be suddenly spring surprises. So you need to respond. Emotional intelligence, the people who are going to lead it must learn how to deal with shocks. Relationship, a lot of negotiating and bargaining must be done, how to relate, negotiate. And of course, creativity. That's it. So a lot of inside-outside view. I just quickly skip scale out engagement and put on a sheet. And I want to just end with this, with managing change. But ultimately, turning around 6 is all about change management. Okay, change management at various levels, and it is a part of it. And this is something that we must have. So because MSME is going to be faced with a lot of import substitutions to global products, that's a move. Because earlier we were all working on import substitution. You see something abroad, copy it, make it somehow in India, and see if you can push it through. And you had the protection of trade barriers, and of course duties. And withdrawal of concessions and subsidies, technology changes, digital world is changing a lot of things, and continuous investment in fixed assets and people skill. So I will stop with that and leave a minute or so for any questions. I know I've rushed through this. Yeah. I hope it's been useful, but anyway, I would welcome any of you to come up back to me with any questions. So I've given my coordinates there. And in the next few pages, I've also given all the abbreviations that I've used. So in case you come back to these slides and have some question, you can think. Okay, thank you very much. So I'll stop here.
Sir, Rajgaru, I think you can write up your mobile and email in the chat box. Sir. Some people are asking reference. I think that will be useful.
I'll do that. I'll just try and do
Yeah.
that.
Sir, indeed, it's a great presentation, sir. Like, Gar ki kahani, like industry, a big kahani is there, big stories there as such. I think we can learn a lot as such from this if we compile all these stories. Now, I request, shall I go some chat box and see the questions, sir? Finally, it's better. Okay for you?
I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Ramachandra Kulkarni garu, excellent presentation with appreciation, sir. Mainly finances are important for causing the sickness, and banks will be able to realize this. Banks need to swiftly act and guide the promoters. Government to take something, he wanted, should be invested or left to buyer behavior item. Should there be not be controls, else we are knowingly allowing the problem failure and another NPA. And yeah, sorry. Yeah. Chandrasekhar Garu, not just system alone on finances, diversion on funds, diversion of funds. That is Chandrasekhar Garu saying. So, and there is our President Ramchandra Garu saying appreciation, excellent presentation and detailing on a realistic basis, sir. And Jayavant Nair Garu, our Vice President, is saying very nice. This could be a start to more interaction with stakeholders in future.
Read out the questions and
Yeah, I think I'm not finding questions as such. I think it's open up.
there are many.
There are many. Yeah. Sir, could you take it up, sir? Shekhar Garu?
No, you carry on, sir.
Yeah. Interest. There is Ramchandra Garu Kulkarni again. Interactive session with all the stakeholders, promoters, government bank, public and private RBI, and CLT would help in understanding crux and resolve solution. I don't know. Is advised probably. And again, Ramchandra Garu V. There is a big talk that the haircuts considered in the several cases are not reasonable. Is it right, sir?
This is a question.
Yeah, this is a question.
Can you just repeat it, sir, for me?
There is a big talk that haircuts considered in several cases are not reasonable. Is it right? Yeah, it's about concessions.
Yeah, I'll answer this question. Okay, here, I'll have to give you the official line from IBBI and other. What they say is that the haircuts today have been deep. Reason because a lot of it are legacy issues that are being addressed by the IBC. So the important point for IBC is that it must work fast and as we had discussed earlier, resolution action should take very fast to realize the value. Because the moment you leave the assets for long periods, the value gets different. So they feel that the haircuts will improve over a period of time. Internationally, they find that the haircuts are much better. The turnarounds are much faster and they quickly deal with issues. They don't allow matters to drag on for long.
Sir, if I'm allowed to talk, sir, I was just thinking that probably unscrupulous elements take advantage of this. Is it happening like that, sir? Is it some possibility?
Yeah.
So that is there always, but I think the IBC has tried to close some of the leakages that were there in the earlier enactments. So like everything, people always find some way of getting around. In fact, to some extent, even IBC was being used by a lot of operational creditors in the early phases. So that's why the threshold limit was increased from 1 lakh to 1 crore. So that the main purpose of the IBC is basically to recovery of large debts. So that is there. So in unscrupulous elements will find. But one important thing that has been happening is that the amendments have been done very fast. In fact, 29A was not there in the original IBC. So when they found that the initial phases, some of the promoters were trying to make backdoor entries by getting huge haircuts and coming back to run their own companies. That's why 29A was quickly introduced to make sure that they did not game the system.
Yeah.
I hope I've addressed that question.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you.
Practical answers.
Sir, Ramchandra Kulkarni garu is saying, presentation may please be circulated. Sir, number is available. I think you can contact him. He will help you out, sir. He will send you that PPT to you. And again, Ramchandra garu, my president saying, should we not have a separate NPA norms to SMEs to give proper support to them and allow more tie initially, which could reduce NPS? And one more question from our Ramchandra garu. Do you think that today's new generation companies who depend on the private equity, probably angel finance and all, and then to public domain through IPOs at a price which does not match their performance, not even future projections, how are they allowed? As the risk is so much, should the investor be left or buyer beware of should there not be controls, else we are knowing allowing a probable failure and another NPA? Yeah, is a great one. All the startups probably. Yeah.
I just take the two questions. One, of course, you were asking about a special NPA regime for startups. Okay, that's of course a policy decision. But whatever I've read on the prudential norms that have been provided, they have created some SMA1, SMA2, and provision to basically get banks to get alerted a little earlier and see how they can help out SME and MSME units too with whatever inputs that they need. But of course, this is a larger question that needs to be addressed in a different forum. The second, with respect to startups, I've steered away from it a little bit because, see, a startup for 2 to 3 years, we cannot use the same parameters to look at whether they are turning sick or not. So that's a completely different framework that needs to be looked at. So I've actually deliberately steered away from that. Maybe at some other time, if required, we could take that subject on a separate platform and cover that.
Yeah.
But I just covered one example in my case of a company called Super Seeds, which was actually started up as a startup and went to doing very well, and the other thing, and then went to private equity, and then the private equity, once they come in, they put in so many stringent things that makes it very difficult for the promoters at time, and then that company actually became sick after that. So that precautions we need to take, especially within private investors, because their expectations may be very high.
Yeah, right, sir. Maybe we should have another session by you, sir, on this topic, because I find that in the recent times itself, we have several cases in front of us. The IPO came with such a big price, and today they are not even at 25% of that. A common investor, he's almost let down. So, I mean, we are allowing an organization which says that the performance is not good and the future projections also are not good. But still, we are allowing them to go to public issue, and then the public doesn't know. They think that this maybe it's a good sort of thing or feature something like that. I mean, I thought maybe, sir, we should discuss in detail. Maybe you're right that the time may not be right for you. It's no.
I think we'll keep this. No, I think there are some thoughts on this, but I thought I'll keep it for another time.
Yes, yes. We'll have one more session perhaps.
Sir, one question from Kamal. He's saying that if at all anyone like to take up any SICK industry, which is the best source to find out? You would like to take a SICK unit and they want to run it.
Okay, that's a difficult question. You need to. In fact, this question was asked by of me by somebody else.
Yeah.
So I said, see, the IBBI site itself, if you go and you navigate the insolvency and bankruptcy court thing, you'll find a lot of cases that are still in the pipeline.
Sir, I'm the one who asked the question. I lost the complete audio. Can you just repeat your answer, sir, if you don't mind?
I said the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India has a website. So if you go in that website, and also there is a website for NCLT. So if you go there, you can see what matters are right now in process. And from that, from the industry, if you can figure out, you can find some names. So that is one. The other one, there are some specialist companies today who actually trade in stressed assets. Like Farama is talking about asset recovery company like Edelweiss and all these people. There are companies which buy stressed companies and then look in the market for people who are interested. So sometimes you can if you put a search, you will get some names of companies who are specialized in handling stressed asset. That means they are doing buying and selling of stressed companies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. If any requirement is there, I'd like to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think fine. Rajigaru, I think time is running short. I think we exceed the time even. I think I request our Honorable Secretary Chandrasekhar Garu. Sir, Ramchandra Garu, could you say, could you ask something?
No, I can't talk because Mr. Muralidharan has given a wonderful presentation. I'll only congratulate you. So thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Several insights are there in this, and several practical aspects also been told. But there are still several problems, sir. I am little in that particular line. I know much more about this than probably somebody who does not know much about it. You are a person right now in it. So the exposures that you made necessary, it made us learn many things. The process involved, and in fact, I was handling even a case under NCLT. So due to some effect. Now the point is, industries continues to face these problems, and I was only looking at probably some more support is required. Sir. All the time, industries, large industries, of course, they have their own issues the way they go about, and several reasons of failure. But in the MSME sector, sir, I still feel that a lot of support is required. That could probably ease out a little amount of NPS to a certain extent. Today, an entrepreneur comes with a lot of research. It's not like earlier days when he just walk in and say, I'll put an industry. He does a lot of research and comes in and puts his valuable money. As he also gave a wonderful example of a guarantor. The guarantees are also been put at stake. So this is a perennial issue, sir. And I think your presentation was wonderful, sir. Thank you very much, Muralidharan Garu, sir.
Yeah. I request our Honorable Secretary
Okay.
Chandrasekhar Garu.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yeah.
I mean, all the participants. I mean, I did not repeat. That is one of the best presentation, no doubt about it. But I feel somewhere when you're talking about some of the causes of the failure, whatever the stress industry units, why there should also be parallelly some punishments under the act. Otherwise, everybody take the loan, get away with that, and you approach insolvency and bankruptcy act and the NCLT, and you don't lose anything. Who are the losers ultimately? It's the public, it's the bankers. You get away, you take a loan and get away. And ultimately, you call it a insolvency, whatever you call it. There should also be equally, when we, like Ramchandra Garu said, there should be a separate thing for NPS or SME. There should be equally punishable offense under some act. Otherwise, one more thing is why it happens. Where is the right strategy? You gave an example of, some WIMCO, you gave an example, and one more thing. And you said 6% due to the labor unrest. Not able to handle labor unrest is the inefficiency, incompetency of the management. I'll give an example of Hosur OTC factory strike. Definitely, I don't want to get into the details since I come from the more of employee relations and industry relations part. And coming to that, see why there is no research facility. Take the automobile industry. Where were we? Where are we today? The technology, totally technology driven. We had only Fiat, we had only Ambi. Today is a complete technology driven. And as rightly said, I think more and more, unless a person starting it, does he have a core competence to get into that business or a manufacturing facility first? And where is the monitoring mechanism that, like yesterday I have seen, 1.1 lakh, 47 lakh, something was written off. And we written off the banks. Whose money? A very proper system, monitoring system put in place. Where is it? People can get away with that. I was feeling.
Sir, 1 minute. Sir, we are sorry to interrupt, but this money won't get written off from the recovery part, sir. Only in the books they written right off, but again, the recovery proceedings will continue against the promoters and the guarantors.
I don't know, at least what we read in the paper, that 1 lakh, 74 lakh something is written off by the government bank, something like that. Anyway, sir, in fact, you gave a presentation in the sense, how to start, how to overcome, and what are the end solutions also. If somebody wants to go for, like it's a start presentation, like a startup presentation, how to start, how to revive, what are the challenges, and what is the, final resolution, even to wind up the, this industries or companies, whatever it is. Once again, on behalf of HMA, I thank you very much, sir, for giving the best presentation. And of course, you are from ITC, naturally the quality is always, high. I mean, that goes without saying. And for patient hearing of all the participants, and I thank Pediraj Garu for getting you on board, and our President Ramchandra Garu, and many of our members not there, maybe Jayant Rani Garu would have been there, and other participants who have participated. And we look forward for many more intellectual and participative, interactive presentation from you, Raj Garu. Thanks a lot once again. Thank you.
Namaste, sir. Namaste, sir. Thank you very much and namaste. Thanks to all. Thank you, Rajendra Prasad ji.
Thanks, sir.
Namaste, sir. It was a wonderful presentation. A great learning exercise.